This tutorial will be an introduction to React and Next.js. It's hands-on, interactive, and hopefully fun as well too. So we're gonna build a real app. I'm gonna walk you through building this from start to finish, explain some of the concepts along the way, and at the end, you'll have a real URL that you can share with your friends. Now, this is designed for beginners who are new to React or Next.js, but if you've used React or maybe Next.js before, hopefully you'll still pick up some new tips along the way too. All right, let's get started. So first, let's install Node.js. Now, if you go to nodejs.org, you can download the latest version, and you'll know that you have it successfully set up if you run node-v in your terminal or command line, and you can see the latest version that we're on here. So ensure you get Node.js installed. You'll also want to ensure that you have Git installed. Now, I believe all new Macs have Git included, but if you run git-v, you'll be able to see what version of Git you're on. If not, go to Git and install this version as well too. Now, I would also recommend that you create a GitHub account. This is where you'll be able to store your code. It's kind of like Google Drive, but for your codes, you can see the versions of it. And then also a Vercel account where we will deploy our code and we'll get our URL from. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to be using VS Code as my text editor or IDE and Google Chrome as my browser. You can use whichever tools you prefer, but this is what I'm going to be using. So I've got my editor up on my left and I've got my browser up on my right. And we can use this as the playground where we'll be building our application today. So first things first, I want to actually walk you through creating a new project from scratch using the command line, and then eventually we'll start from the quick start. But I think it's helpful to understand exactly what specific steps you need to build a Next.js and React app from scratch before we take the easy route. So first, in the command line on the left in my terminal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new directory. We can just call this Next React course, and then we can change our directory into our Next React course here. Now, inside of here, I'm going to create a brand new project defined by a package JSON. So npm has this command called npm init. I'm just going to auto select all of the defaults for here. And let me open up this project. Okay, so we have this project open in VS Code, and we can see the new package JSON file that we've created. Now, most of the stuff in here is usually for actually publishing packages to npm. So when you want to bundle up some code and publish it so that someone else can use it. For this application, we can actually get rid of all of this, and we can get rid of all of this. And really all we're going to need here is the scripts. But first we need to install some dependencies. Now this gets into package managers. Node by default includes the package manager npm. That was how we created this package JSON file here. But there's a bunch of different package managers. There's npm, there's yarn, pnpm, bun. It doesn't really matter which one you use. I'm going to use pnpm because that's what I use most of the time. All of them are great. So I actually have an alias on my command line. Instead of writing pnpm every single time, I just write pn because I'm lazy. So you can also do that in your bash or whatever terminal file you're using. So I'm going to install Next, React, and React DOM. Those are all the dependencies that you need to create your first Next.js or React application. And that adds in a new key into our package JSON for all those different dependencies. So this is the most boilerplate, the smallest amount of dependencies you need to get started. And then we're going to make a new command in here called dev. It's how we can start our local dev server. And the command is nextdev. So this is the smallest amount of configuration needed to actually start up a local dev server for my Next.js application. So now on the right, we have our package JSON that we've walked through. We have a lock file, which tells your package manager how to specifically resolve the versions of packages. You can pretty much ignore this. This is just going to be auto-generated, but you usually check it in to your Git provider of choice so that you have this version, which means that if somebody pulls down your repository, which is where you store your code, they can always install the exact version of the packages that you're using. And then all of the node modules that were included, which are all of the packages, are included here on your local file system as well too. So let's create our first route inside of our Next.js application, just the smallest, most minimal route, and then we'll get into talking about what React is doing. So I'm going to make a new folder. We're going to call it app. I'm going to make a new file. We'll call it layout.js. And I'm going to make another file that's called page.js. Now, don't worry, I'm going to explain these conventions a little bit more later, But for now, I'm going to just complete these. So we're going to do export default function root layout. And that just scaffolded me some stuff here, but we can do HTML. And then we're going to do body. And then we can do the children. And this is going to be English. Okay, that looks fine. Export default function page. And we'll do return. We'll do an H1. We'll do, H1. And we can say, hello world. Yep, that looks good. Okay, I can close these. Okay, so now let's run our local dev server. And on the right here, I can open up localhost 3000 and we see hello world. So this is the most minimal example of getting started here. And another thing I'm going to do inside of our package.json is I'm going to add this -- turbo flag to make our dev server faster. By the time you watch this video, this might already be the default, but I'm just going to flip it on here so we can get even faster when we're loading up our application to start, as well as making changes. So let me walk through what's happened here. We have a page that actually is being shown on the page or in our browser. This is the most minimal example. And if I go inside of here and I add some more exclamation marks, I hit save, on the right, you see that it's instantly updated in our browser. This is what we call fast refresh or hot module reloading. And that makes it really fast for you to iterate locally, make changes, add things to your page, and then just, hit save and see it reflected over here in your browser. So really fast iteration time. Now, if you've seen Next.js anywhere else or you've used it before in the past, you might be wondering what that app folder is. So that was something that was introduced in Next.js 13. It was stabilized in Next.js 13.4. We're now on 14, so this is now kind of the standard way. But if you still see other examples that are using the old pages directory, that's totally fine too. That's still supported and works. So there's actually two different routing systems in Next.js. So I could, for example, say, pages/about.js. And inside of here, I could say export default function about. And we're going to go here and return about. So if I go to our browser and I go to /about here, we see our new page for about. So you can use both of these routers. It's okay if you have them in the same application, totally fine. For the rest of this tutorial, I'll only be using the app router or app directory, but I just wanted to quickly mention that in case you're coming in with some pre-existing knowledge. Okay, so we have a local dev server running now. We can make changes, see them updated in the browser. We have our sandbox for editing our React components and making changes. And we have our first React component shown on the screen. Let's actually take a little bit of a step backwards here and talk about some of the fundamental concepts of React. Now, the reason I went in this route is because I personally learn best by building, and I think it's the most helpful for you all coding along that you can actually have your editor open, make these changes, see them update in the browser, versus me talking about it in the abstract a little bit here. So if you haven't heard of React, it's a library for making user interfaces. You get to write components and React takes care of the rest, basically. And it's really fun to work with. And I'm going to show you some practical examples. So the first concept I want to talk about here is JSX. And you might be noticing, looking at this component, it looks kind of like JavaScript. It looks pretty similar. But then there's also this HTML in here as well too. And JSX is the magic that allows us to combine HTML and JavaScript and have the ability to write conditional statements and check if this, I want to display this UI, otherwise display this UI, or to substitute in variables in places. For example, maybe we wanted to say, my name is Lee. So I'm going to put this function here, let name equals Lee. And then rather than this hard-coded string here, this hard-coded value, I can use these braces here. And I can say, you know what, actually, instead of that value, let's substitute in Lee. So I hit save, and I see that dynamic value rendered on the right. Now, trivial example, but this is so powerful when you start to think about grabbing data from remote locations or having some computational logic in here to check for something or to use any JavaScript expressions and then put that logic actually into the HTML. So it's allowing you to very easily template your UI. The second thing I want to talk about is composability. This is one of my favorite parts about React. So maybe actually this header component here that displays my name, we want to model this as its own function, its own component. So I'm going to say function, we're going to call this header. And inside of here, what I could do actually is just remove this. So name equals Lee, return h1 name Lee, awesome. Now here, maybe I want to have some header component. Maybe this is a section, and I'll say, this is my amazing site. So I've got a paragraph tag, I've got a section tag, and then I'm composing this header component. I'm using this inside of the page component. So the page is a parent, the header is a child here. So if I hit save on the right, now I see the section, the header, and then the paragraph. So this is pretty powerful. Again, simple example, but this concept can take you very, very far with React. And you can, make things a little bit fancier than this as well too. So maybe, for example, I wanted to pass some information to my component. Maybe I didn't want this name to be just Lee hard-coded inside of there. I wanted to say, you know what? I want the name to be Bob. And this value is called a prop, short for properties. So I can forward more information to the header component. So let me remove this. Now, how does it get access to this name? Well, here inside the arguments, you have the props object. And on that object, you can use a JavaScript feature here to destructure that object. And I want to pull off the name key. So I could as well, if I really wanted to, write props, and this is the whole object, and then do props.name like this to access the key of name. But a really nice functionality there is that you can just destructure that and pull name off here. So now if I hit save, I see Bob on the right because I passed in this dynamic value. I could change it back to Lee. And this is how you can kind of forward data or information between components. So that's really helpful. But passing as props isn't always the best design. It really depends on the type of data. Again, the composability here is one of the great parts about React. So what would that look like? Well, right now, this is a self-contained component. So it has an opening tag, and then it closes at the end. But what if we wanted to pass some children to this component? So the parent here, I want to say the children of this component. Maybe we want this to be, maybe we want the H1 here that's going to say Lee. We can remove this. And we also want to have, maybe we also want to have some other information here. We could, if we wanted to. This is all the child of this header. Now, if I go up to header on the props, there's also a prop called children. So now, maybe inside of here, I wanted to have like a, I could use the literal header HTML component. That works. I have a header component. I have an H1 that is the children, and then I finish that out here. Now, I don't want duplicate H1s, so I could remove it from here, I guess, if I wanted to. Sure. It still explains the concept. I could change this here just so we can see it updated on the right. And this is great. I can kind of stack my components on top of each other. I can compose components together. And you can do some really fancy stuff with this, but the fundamental thing here is that you get to group these bits of logic into reusable pieces. And while right now this header component is all designed, or it's all living in the same file, this is a little bit of a personal preference, but I kind of prefer to keep things in the same file for as long as I can until maybe they're used in a bunch of different places. But it's nice to keep the code that changes together in the same file. But just to show an example, what if instead I make a new file here? We'll call this header.js, and I could actually pull this component out, go over to header.js, and right now there's no exports. So with the JavaScript module system, I want to either export the default function from this file or a named export from this file. So if I did export function header, this would be a named export, or if I did export default function, it would be the default export. I'll do a named export here. Again, kind of a personal preference. It doesn't matter too much. So now when I'm importing, what the editor is showing me here is actually a default export. So there's no braces around here, but I have a named export. So I would wrap this with header, and then actually the file path here is just to /, so it's in the same directory, / header, and I hit save, and now I can change this again, put even more exclamation marks, and we see that it's updated on the right. So you can kind of refactor out bits and move them around as you want. And this component could even come from some external dependency as well too. For example, if I actually stop my local development server and I install a new dependency, React Tweet, so I can embed tweet embeds or X embeds or whatever they're calling it nowadays, and I restart my dev server, maybe inside of here, rather than this paragraph, I want to do a tweet, and the tweet is going to take in some ID, and I'll just paste in some ID, and then we need to import this tweet. We'll see if I can get VS Code to give me a suggestion here. It does not. That's okay. Import tweet from React Tweet. Okay, that looks fine. Let's reload our page over here. Okay, so I get to reuse, install, and just import components that can do some pretty cool stuff. This could be a tweet. This could be something visual from my CMS. This could be a markdown library. It could really be anything. The cool thing about this component actually is that not only did it show the visual bits, but it also knew how to go grab the data and determine what to display on the screen, just given an ID. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's some new functionality that's in React, but it's a really powerful concept. You get to encapsulate this logic, put it in a component, and then share it with anyone to use. All right, now most people don't actually start their Next.js or React applications this way. They instead start with a command that helps scaffold out all of the files for them. So while this was interesting and it helped you understand the foundational pieces, the MVP of what you needed to actually make your application, let's use the common default, which is the tool called Create Next App. So in the command line, like we've done before, we can do npx, which is essentially like running a script for you. It's calling some package installation that's going to scaffold out and run a command for you. And you can do create. Actually, let me go back a directory here. So we can do npx create next app at latest. So we're going to install the latest version, and we'll call this next React course create next app. Now, this is going to give you an interactive set of prompts that you can use to pick what options you want. Now, the reason I mentioned most people start from this is also because most people nowadays are starting from TypeScript. This is, again, kind of personal preference, but I'm going to start with TypeScript. We're not going to use ESLint. We can use Tailwind. I think we'll go ahead and install it, but I'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to styling options and how we want to style our application. Source directory is just a optional way of bucketing your code. And then we're using this app router here as well too. Don't need to customize any of that. Okay. Now you're going to notice it installed the dependencies we already talked about. It also installed some other dependencies for us for TypeScript and for the styling setup. So let me jump over to that directory. Okay, new directory. I've cleared out my browser window here. Let's take a look at what Create Next App includes by default. And to start, I'm just going to walk through the entire directory structure and talk about what files are included, and then we can show kind of what we're getting for default here. So first things first, I'm going to go into the package JSON. I'm going to also add that turbo flag again. That might be the default. Again, you can get rid of some of this stuff if you want. Private true, it's like, I'm not going to publish this package to NPM. We've got our scripts. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these later. We don't have ESLint set up, so we can remove that. Okay, those dependencies look good. I'm going to run our dev server. And if I go back over to here, I go to localhost 3000, I will see our Create Next App application. So this includes a little bit more than just a hello world. It gives you a nice design here to get started by default with some links out to some helpful things. But we don't really need to jump into that right now. Let's talk about the file structure. We'll go bottom up here. So we'll start with the tsconfig.json. This file automatically created by Next.js, you shouldn't need to touch. It's going to automatically set up all of the right defaults for you for your Next.js application to use TypeScript. So that you don't really need to touch. The Tailwind config, the post CSS config, again, these are going to be defaults that are scaffolded out because of the option that we selected for Tailwind styling. In the future, you might not even need these. They might just work without even needing to be there, depending on what time you watch this video. We can ignore those for now. The README included just gives you some more information about the application. The package.json we already talked about. The next config file, you can pass additional options to configure Next.js. Maybe it's something around where you want to allow image optimization from, or maybe it's specific directories you want to customize. You can do a lot of things here, but the default, you don't need to configure anything. This file is included for TypeScript, but you don't need to do anything by default. We include a gitignore file by default that has some good initial things included for you, some files that we're pretty sure you probably don't want to commit these to Git. They want to stay on your local machine, like auto-generated files. We have a public directory. This public directory is things that we want to be publicly accessible on our Next.js server. So if I go to next.svg, for example, I'm able to access this file that's kind of hosted on our server route. So we've got some SVGs in there. We already talked about node modules. .next is the compiled version of our application. So when I'm working locally, it's generating all of these internal files that Next.js can serve up. You can basically ignore this file. This is kind of considered like the internals of while you're working locally. But if you needed to clear your cache, for example, you can delete your .next file. And then we have this app directory or app router, and we're using, again, a layout and page file from the previous setup that we had too, but rather than .js or .jsx, you have .ts or .tsx. Now the JS or JSX thing, file extension, it's really personal preference. It doesn't actually change that much. But in this one, we're using TypeScript, so we've got type .tsx here. We also have a favicon. So this is automatically served up by our browser. All you have to do is include it in the folder, and we'll just automatically work when it's a child of the app. We've got some global CSS that we're including here. It's got the Tailwind set up. And then we have our root layout and our page. Now, this is a good time to talk about these special files and what they mean to Next.js. I kind of glossed over it a little bit earlier. So the layout, especially this root layout, is going to wrap our entire application. So when we talk through those fundamentals around the composition of React components, this component wraps all of the other components. And that's why it has the top level tag, the HTML tag, the body tag, and then it takes in the children as a prop, if we go back to those fundamentals, and returns it here with whatever we pass below, which is going to be the page, right? So a layout wraps a page. We're also doing some other stuff in here by default. We're using this built-in font functionality from Next.js that allows you to install fonts from Google Fonts or from your local machine to style your application and do it in a way that doesn't affect performance. We also have some metadata. So this will automatically set the values inside of the head of your HTML document. So title tags and other meta tags for descriptions or OG images. You can configure that all through here. And there's also types as well too if you want to go see all the different fields that are available. But basically every field that you need to configure your metadata is in there. So this is the root layout. And then inside of the page, you're going to be like, whoa, what is this? This is Tailwind. So it is CSS styles inlined into your HTML. So kind of like how you can put your HTML into your JavaScript with JSX. Tailwind is kind of doing that as well for your styling. But fundamentally, this is pretty much the same thing as what we were looking at before. You have a default component that's going to render some HTML or some markup on the screen. And we're also using an image component here to optimize images. For the sake of not overwhelming everyone with Tailwind styles to get started, what we can do is let's actually just clear this out because we're not going to need that. And we can go back to something like a section, Next.js plus this, and we can remove the image as well too. Now you're like, whoa, what is this interesting repeating pattern over here? Pretty sure there's something in our in our background here. There's a linear gradient, so we can just get rid of that stuff as well too. It's also worth noting, if you start here, small thing, Tailwind includes a CSS reset, which removes all of the default browser styles. So if you're wondering why my H1 looks different here versus what it differed before, that's what's happening there. You don't have to use Tailwind, by the way. We can use just normal CSS files if we would prefer. I could write all my styles in here if I wanted to, but this will allow us to iterate a little bit faster here during the tutorial. So I talked about the layout file, this special file convention here that explicitly has the name layout. Well, page is similar in the sense that you need to explicitly call this file page. When we get into actually showing multiple routes here, you'll understand why there will be multiple page files. But I just want to quickly call out that those are special file names. But now that we have our playground, we've talked through kind of all the base steps, let's actually get into building our application together. Today, we're going to build a quiz application. So you'll be able to create quizzes, and a quiz will have different answers. They'll have a question and some answers, and you'll be able to see which one is the right answer. Pretty simple example, but it'll allow us to show different routes inside of Next.js, both grabbing data as well as mutating or adding data. We're going to work with a Postgres database as well too, and hopefully learn some things along the way. So let's get started. First, I want to talk about routing in between different pages. We're going to have a home page that lists all the quizzes in our application, but then we're also going to have individual pages for each quiz as well too. So on side our index route here, maybe we want to change this to all quizzes, for example. But then below it, we're going to need to have a list of quizzes. So this could be, exactly like that. An unordered list of quizzes, quiz 1, 2, 3. It's going to have links to those specific quizzes. So we can leave this for now, but we need to understand how to link specifically to those pages. So let's go to our app. We're going to make a new folder. We're going to call this quiz. And what you're going to start to see is that Next.js has a file system-based router. You can kind of already tell this by the layout in the pages files, being how Next.js was able to understand how to go to this index route. But this works for really any route in your application. So if I make a new folder under quiz, we need to be able to understand the dynamic parts of the route too. And we can use brackets here, square brackets, to denote variables that can be substituted in our route. So /quiz /some ID, 1, 2, or 3. Now, inside of here, this goes back to what I talked about, the special files. So page.tsx. This is how Next.js is going to be able to route to specifically /quiz/1 or /quiz/2 versus the index route. So we can export default function quiz page, and then inside of here, maybe we want to return something like this. Sure. We have a section, we have quiz 1. This is our quiz page. Now, if we go back here, we had this list of links, and I want you to notice, pay attention in the browser, because when we navigate to this other page, we're going to do a full browser load. So if I click on quiz 1, we see the browser spin, and we navigate over to quiz 1. This is just a standard browser navigation between pages. We can go quiz 1, quiz 2. Awesome. Now, quiz 1 is literally hard-coded in that page for now, but we're going to change that out. But I wanted to first show how we can make these transitions between pages a little bit faster. And we can do that using a built-in component from Next.js called the link component. So inside of our unordered list, instead of defining an A tag, we can use the link component, and we're going to import that from next link. So go to quiz 1, and we don't actually even need to use the A tag. The link component will generate the A tag for us. So we can get rid of that. Awesome. And then we'll replace this. And quiz 2, quiz 3. Cool. Now, notice in the browser, when I go from the index route to the quiz 1 route was really fast. I didn't have to do the full browser transition or the full page load because of this link component. So it's able to prefetch, it's able to understand what I'm going to route to, and then make it feel like it's part of a single page application, or feel like it's part of a unified application, kind of like a mobile app feels, right? Where it's really fast to navigate between pages. Next.js takes care of that for you. Now, if you're still linking to external links, like I need to go out to the Vercel website, you would still use the A tag there. There's no point in, you're not going to preload the external link, but for navigating internally, you would want to use this internal link. All right, now let's change that hard-coded quiz 1 to a dynamic value. So inside of this dynamic route, this dynamic page, how do we access that ID value or that ID parameter? So in the props, again, just a React component, in the props for this page, Next.js includes a prop for you. And that prop is called params. And those are the parameters of the route segment or the dynamic route. So the params, and it's going to complain because I need some TypeScript types here, has an ID that is a string. So, and I'm missing a closing brace there. So rather than quiz 1 here, I can use my JSX to include some dynamic values here. And now I'm getting some TypeScript help because that's all set up. So it knows that, hey, our ID is a value that's available. It's a key on this object. And we can use quiz whatever here. So now when I go to quiz 2, I see quiz 2. When I go to quiz 3, I see quiz 3. Those are kind of the basics of navigating between routes really fast and also reading the dynamic values from the routes based on how they're defined in your file system. Now, I don't think we actually have a need for a nested layout here, but I want to quickly show how this works as well too, so that you have the right mental model of layouts and pages. We talked about the root layout that wraps our entire application, but this same model of composing components of a parent and a child, of a layout and a page, can also work as you go further down the application tree. So if you think about the root layout at the top of the tree and you have different branches as you go down, when you get into the quiz routes and this quiz page, well, what if I want to have multiple pages underneath quiz/something? Maybe I want quiz/1, but maybe I also want the quiz/results or some other route inside of here. Well, the nice thing is that you can have nested layouts inside of here too. So I can make a new file inside of this ID folder, or maybe I actually want it right here underneath the quiz route. We're going to call this layout.tsx. It's going to be the same concept as our root layout. So a component that takes in some children and renders it. So we could do export default function nested layout. That's going to have the props that are children, and then we could return. This is giving me autocomplete for the root layout, but we'd want some tag here, and maybe instead of body, we want some nav, for example. And maybe inside of the nav, we want, this is my navigation. Again, this could really be whatever you want here. And let's throw some TypeScript types on here. So now this is my nested layout for everything under the quiz route. So if I go to quiz/1, I see this is my navigation from quiz/1, and you can take this concept basically as far down you want to go. So you can nest many different layouts as well too. I don't think we have a need for a nested layout here, but I just wanted to quickly mention that those concepts stack on top of each other. All right, so going back to our index route, we have a list of quizzes hard-coded. We can navigate between routes. We can go to different quizzes here. We kind of understand the fundamentals of going between pages, layouts, pages. Let's talk about how we actually change this from being hard-coded to fetching real data. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to use Postgres as our database. You could use MySQL. You could use any database that you want, but we're going to use Postgres here. So I'm going to quit my dev server. I'm going to install the Postgres package. This Postgres package, you could use other Postgres packages you want. This one's going to give me the ability to just write some SQL queries really easily. And then I'm also going to create a .env.local file. I think the touch command only works on Mac, by the way. So I think it's different on Windows, but you could also use your editor to do that. So I'm going to make an env.local file, and then inside of here, I'm going to have a database underscore URL. it's giving me autocomplete for Postgres or for MySQL, but the Postgres one looks pretty similar to that. It's like this, and there's going to be something here. So I'm going to go off camera here for a second. I'm going to go grab the Postgres URL for my application. You could use any service you want. I'm going to use Vercel for this, but grab your database URL and then come back here. Okay, so grab my database URL, put it in my env.local file. I've installed my Postgres package. Now I can restart my dev server, and we can go to our route here and we can start fetching some data. So I'm going to import Postgres from Postgres, and I want to make some query. Now, right now we have this hard-coded list. So let's actually take this, let's cut this, and let's compose in here a quizzes component. And then we're going to make a new component. We're going to call this quizzes. Sure. We'll see what the autocomplete gives us here. This was the code we had before, which was manually writing out unordered list item, link, the href, and then the text here. Let's see what the AI gave us here. We have an unordered list. We have JSX to use a dynamic value here. And we're going to run an expression. And the expression is to take the quizzes variable, map over that array. For each quiz, we want to make a list item that has a link inside of it. That link has a dynamic href. It's using a JavaScript tag template literal string here. So the special backticks allow us to inject dynamic values into the string rather than concatenating them onto the end. And then we access quiz.name, and it's a child of the link. This all looks correct and right. But we have, again, still this hard-coded list of quizzes. Now, one of the really cool things about Next.js and the latest React features is that you can actually mark components as asynchronous and fetch data directly. Now, if you've maybe dabbled with React a little bit prior to some of the latest features in Next.js and React, you might have needed to use client-side effects to fetch data or other kind of Next.js specific APIs. But what we're showing here is just standard React, and it's called a React server component. So I can mark this component as asynchronous, and I actually think I need to, set up a connection here to Postgres. We're going to do process.env.database URL. This value will be automatically read from my env.local file or whatever my deployment platform is, and passed along to the Postgres function. It's complaining because this value could be not available, but I know it is. If you want to have better error checking, you can do that here. I'm using some TypeScript foo there. Now inside of here, I want to say, okay, go get all of the quizzes from my quizzes table, select star from quizzes, return those quizzes, and then map over them. So that all looks good. Okay, my thing is running here. I reload the page, and nope, nothing here. I think I know why too. So I've already set up a Postgres database here that has some quizzes in it, and I'll be able to include a link to the command that I use to just scaffold out some data in this database. The ID on that quiz is actually quiz_ID. So I'm going to select .id here. I can use Command D to select multiple inside of VS Code, and I can do quiz_ID. And then also instead of quiz.name, it is quiz.title. Now, if I wanted to make this better, since this isn't giving me any help from TypeScript, it's saying, hey, there was this row that was returned back, I could actually define a type here. So I could say a type of quiz has a quiz ID, it has a title. I think there's also some other stuff on here as well too. And then I could say, you know what? Quizzes is actually an array of quiz or quizzes. Now I get some helpful information here about what property I have available. So if, for example, before when I had name, it would have blown up and said, actually, by the way, Lee, it is title. So I save and I reload, and I see all of the quizzes here. I have programming quiz 1, 2, and 3, my quiz, awesome. And again, I can navigate between here. I can go to quiz 1, 2, 3. So I'm now fetching dynamic data from my database. This is just standard Postgres here. So, similar if you're using MySQL as well too. If I would recommend, if you're new to databases, if you're new towards the more backend side of applications, use AI tools, large language models, ChatGPT. Use these tools to help be your tutor or your pair programmer to learn how these things work. For example, you can say, please describe this database schema. Tell me how it works. Help me query, help me insert placeholder data into this database. It'll help guide you along as you're learning databases as well too. That's a little bit outside the scope here, where we have a database, we're able to fetch some data from it and pull this values dynamically. Now, another interesting part here is that this component is now an asynchronous component. It fetches data dynamically. One of the cool things about the React model too is we have control over how we reveal or show content on the page, as well as how we have a fallback when loading asynchronous data. So if we wanted to, for example, we could actually instead wrap this component, if I can type, with suspense. Yes, have a fallback. Okay. And this has some fallback React component. It could be a loading skeleton, it could be a loading spinner, and then the child of that is our actual quizzes component. So if I hit save here, I see it was loading, and then we showed our value. So you can really have fine-grained control over how you reveal or show loading states in your application using React Suspense and server components. Just wanted to quickly mention that as well too. Some helpful guidance here is that you want to place your data fetching close to where you're actually rendering the UI for that data that you return back. So we fetched our quizzes. It makes sense to put this in a quizzes component that actually renders out these values. Now, depending on when you're watching this video, in a future version, there might be a flag turned on that's called partial pre-rendering. What that's going to do is it's going to allow you to have the rest of this page. You could have a bunch of other things on here, right? That part can be essentially pulled out and made separate from the dynamic parts of your pages where you're actually fetching data. So that part will automatically be taken care of by Next.js and make the rest of the shell of your application very fast to load. And then you get control over this specific quizzes component defined by your React Suspense boundaries that I was showing just a minute ago on how you actually want that content to load in. So writing your code today using Suspense and thinking about putting your data fetching close to your components, using Suspense and thinking about how you want to reveal and load content will help prepare you for a future version of Next.js, or maybe the default by the time you're watching this. Another thing to mention here too, as well, is that, again, depending on the time that you're watching this, right now we're making this dynamic data fetch through the Postgres package here. And there's a built-in caching system into Next.js such that, let's say I have multiple places where I want to query for these quizzes. I can ensure that we're only making one call there. If you're using the Fetch API, this automatically works today, and there's future improvements coming here that make it even easier to do this when you're using something like this, like the Postgres client here, or just any database ORM or any other value. So definitely check out the documentation to learn more about options for caching for non-fetch as well, depending on the time you're watching this. But this at least gets you prepared for the future as well too, thinking about how these pieces will fit together. Now, this page looks pretty boring, so let's add a little bit of styles here and talk about Tailwind, CSS, and inline styles. So, for example, on the H1, I can provide a prop to H1 or an attribute to this HTML element called class name. And you're probably thinking, if you've used HTML before, why is it class name instead of class? There are some specifics to React like this where the attribute names are a little bit different. And the React land versus the HTML land, there aren't very many, but class name is one of those. So class name, for example, maybe we want font 2XL, text blue, text blue 700. This is the or is it text to Excel? I might have forgot. Text to Excel. Text to Excel font semi-bold. Yeah. So one of the nice things about Tailwind CSS is you get this really fast iteration loop when you're kind of editing your inline styles here, your co-located styles with your code, and then you get to just hit save and see it update on the right. This isn't the only way that you can do things, by the way. You could, for example, do inline styles. So you can pass a style object here, and you could do something like that, for example. Just remove this for a second here. Why is this complaining? Oh, I think I messed that up. Yeah, I did. Cool. So font size. This isn't my favorite one because you have to do a different casing here than the normal CSS elements, but sure. Font size, large, font weight, align center, some margin. Awesome. So you can do this if you want as well too. You can also do traditional class names. So my hero, title, whatever. The problem with this is that these names have to be unique. So, I could go into my global CSS file and I could say my hero, title, whatever. You can do that, of course, but it makes it a little bit difficult as your styles scale in your application. So what I would typically recommend if you don't want to do Tailwind is something called CSS modules. So you get to scope the styles that you want to load to specific pages or components. So I would do a new file. We'll call this, styles.home.module.css. So this is going to be a CSS module. And I'll have a class in here. We'll call it hero, and we'll do font size to rem or pixels or whatever value you want to use here. And now inside of here, I want to do styles.hero. And the styles is going to give me, let's see if it, nope, okay. I'll go import styles from /home.module.css. So I'm able to get access to whatever these styles are here. Cool. Hit save. Okay, so same, but different. It's another way of doing it, just slightly different. This is kind of all syntactical preference. So whichever way you or your team prefers writing things. A lot of people really like CSS modules because that same component module that you think about with style or with React, you get to apply to your styles as well too. So only include the styles for this CSS module in this page, for example. For the rest of this tutorial, I'll just go ahead and use Tailwind just for the sake of it's already installed here, but you can really do any of these that you want or other popular styling solutions as well too. So we'll remove the blue, we'll keep it 2XL semi-bold. Awesome. Okay, so we have a list of quizzes. We're displaying it on our index route. Let's actually go to the quiz pages and start displaying more information about the quiz as well too. So maybe to make this a little bit more clear, we'll just do underline so it's clear that those are links as well too, and these go over the individual quizzes. And I can go to this quiz page. Okay, so we're fetching a quiz, or we're displaying a quiz based on the ID, but we need to actually dynamically fetch this quiz based on that value as well too. So let's go back to here, and I could abstract this out and do like a database file if I wanted to, but for the sake of good old copy paste, we can just include this for here. And then let's say I want to do a new async function quiz. My editor is learning a little bit. It takes in some ID, that's a string. We make a call here, select star from quizzes, where quiz ID equals whatever this ID is. Okay, sure. We maybe we want this to be a section. H1 is quiz 0 title, and that might not be right, but we're going to see. We have our quiz page, takes in the ID. Okay, so now we need to take this And, we could have a bunch of other things on here. We could have some paragraph. This is the page for a quiz. Sure. What we're going to do is we're going to have, quiz. We'll have this nested quiz component again, because in a future version of Next.js, there might be some optimizations here on by default that make most of this page static by default. And that means that you might want to have more of your page that's not doing the data fetching. So I'm intentionally putting the data fetching close to the code here. Since we already have the top level section, we'll do a div there. Okay, so we forward the ID as a prop, params the ID. That's a string, goes into here. We fetch some data and we return it back. Okay, so I saved, and over here on the right, we now see that the title of the quiz, Programming Quiz 1, is being fetched from our database. If I go back, Quiz 2, Quiz 3, these are all being dynamically pulled from the Postgres database here. So this is a start, but the actual database is, we've added a little bit more information here. So the way the schema works is, actually, let me just pull that up. So I pasted the schema for the database into the README here, and we can talk through how the relations work here. So we have a list of quizzes that have an ID, a title, and a description, what the question is that we're going to ask, and then just when we created it, just for best practice. And then we also have a table of the answers. So there are many answers for one quiz linked by the ID, and one of the answers is going to be the correct answer. Now, this could be, there's many ways you could define the schema here. You could go way more complex. You could add in user authentication and have quizzes for different users. This is just intentionally meant to be a pretty simple example. There's a lot of ways you could do this, but we'll roll with this for now. And just to help speed things up a little bit here, I've actually just copy pasted in a larger query here, and we're going to talk through what some of those bits are. So to get not only information about the quiz, but also join it with the answers, we're going to do a couple things. Let me start here. First, given the ID of the quiz, we're going to join a query from two different tables together. So we're going to get the answers. We're going to call the quiz's values. We're going to shorten it to just Q. So we want the quiz ID, quiz title, quiz description, the question that we're asking, and then we also want some information about the answers shortened to A. So answer ID, answer text, and whether it's correct. And we're looking through all the quizzes and we're finding the one based on that specific ID. So let's change this here. Instead of quiz, this is answers, and this is quiz title. We'll do a paragraph here. Yep, answers at 0, quiz description. Now, sure, we could do the quiz question here as well too. Maybe we want to style that a little bit differently. We want to iterate over the answers. So that looks fine. We have an unordered list, answers.map answer, list item key is the answer ID. Yes, actually, yeah, let's see. Actually, let's just simplify this. We can get rid of the input. And instead of the label, we'll do a paragraph. So the answer text. Okay. Yeah, all that looks good. Okay. Programming quiz 1. All right. Reload the page. So now we've fetched information about the quiz. We could make this class name, text to Excel. Maybe we want, maybe on the question, we want text Excel, we want margin Y to be 4, we want text gray 700 here. Okay, just some like small tweaks, right? Programming quiz 1, a quiz about programming concepts. What is a variable? Well, we have a container for storing data, we have a programming language, or we have a mathematical operation. Now we need a way to check which one is the correct answer. So let's do, not on the questions themselves, but down here below, we're going to want some way to have an action, some action that checks, okay, let's check the answer. And a good mental model here to think is, I have an action, I probably want to start with a form, which is a little different maybe than If you've worked with Next.js or React a little bit in the past, slightly updated mental model here. So I'm going to start with a form HTML element, but then again, if you've worked with just normal HTML, then this is actually the same mental model you had. I'm going to start with a form here, a submit button that says, or actually I don't even need a submit button. It's implied. But we want this to say like show answer or reveal answer or something like this. Okay, so this button is going to reveal the answer. And I want to show something unique here that you might not have thought of, which is, what about if I want to send a link to somebody and I want them to go directly to see the completed quiz? Now, you could use some JavaScript, right, to reveal or hide which answer is correct on the page. But I want to challenge your mental model to think server first and think URL first for how we could show this answer. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to have an action, a server action, that actually updates the URL. So on a form, we can use the action prop. This is just normal HTML, but instead of a URL, we're actually going to have a function. This is a React server action, and this should be an asynchronous function. Inside of here, to mark this as a server action, you can do this inline, or we could pull this out into a separate file. We want to say use server. So this magic string or this magic directive is telling Next.js, telling its compiler, it's telling it how to understand this code should be pulled out and essentially turned into an API for me. So I don't need to manually create some API endpoint on my server. I get to kind of write my backend code, or I get to write my API code directly either inline here as this kind of action handler, or I could have it in a separate file as well too. So inside of use server, we have this action for the form. We're going to redirect for quiz / params.id. And instead of /answer, we could do show equals true. So we're going to use a query param. We could have a separate page for this as well too, but let's use a query param, and I will import redirect from next navigation. Okay, so we did this. How do we actually get that URL search param? Well, the props for the page, not only is there params, there is also search params. So inside of here, we have not only params, we have search params, which is show, optional, the question mark, the string. So we have quiz, ID of this, we have form, this. Okay, that all looks good. So let me save, get some reformatting going on here. And what's going to happen here, I could probably style this a little bit better. Class name, let's do background gray 200, margin X 2, margin Y 3, and I was in my head, I was thinking padding when I wrote that out, and then maybe we still do margin 2. Okay, and maybe we do rounded. And actually, I don't know that I like that. Maybe we just want padding 2. Sure. Okay. We probably don't even need margin. Doesn't matter. We have background gray. We have some padding. Okay, we have a button to show an answer. And you know what? It's not going to be complete unless I add a hover style on here too. We want to make background gray 400. We're getting wild with the tailwind CSS now. Oh, but that's not good enough. That's not good enough. We need a transition. Transition all, which means that animate those. Ooh, now we're talking. And that's too dark. Now I'm just going to nitpick this. Oh, okay. There we go. Now we're finally ready. Okay, so when we click the button, server action, redirect to the quiz, and show true. Okay, so we have quiz 1, show true. Now, nothing happened, but really what happened is the Next.js server said, oh, actually, there's a new value in the search params. Do you want to do something with it? And we definitely do. So what we could do here is pass the, it's not working, search params. Cool. What we could do here is pass the search params up to this component and search params. And this is going to be search params. Cool. That's got the show. That all looks right. Okay. Now inside of here, maybe inside this paragraph, we want to do something different if it is correct. So if search params.show is true, and we could cast this to a Boolean somewhere else, and the answer is correct, show a check mark. That seems fine. Okay, let's click show answer. Look at that. So it redirects back to the same route. It has a search param, and it now shows us what the correct answer is by putting the check marks by it without having to add any client-side JavaScript to do this, or if you've used React before, any React state before, or any other logic. This is all just server-side code. Your server is templating out your UI. If you've been using PHP or Rails or other server-side languages before, this probably feels very familiar. If you're kind of newer to the JavaScript React ecosystem and you might have seen state before, this might feel a little bit different. But it's really powerful how far you can get with this model by lifting state up to the server and thinking about your URL as a function of state as well too. Because now I just got the added benefit of being able to send my friends this link where they can automatically see the selected answer. So the quiz here, the question has already been completed, for example. And we can make this button like toggle if we wanted to and change or remove that, but the same idea holds true. Okay, so let's quickly recap. We have our home page as our list of quizzes. We have pages for the individual quizzes where we can click to show an answer. It will redirect back to that page and display a check mark by the right one. That all looks great. What else here? Well, maybe actually, if I go back to our index route, maybe we want to have a form to add in a new quiz. And I want to talk about this because I want to also talk about the last bit here of this kind of data lifecycle. We've fetched data, we've handled the data, but now I actually want to mutate or add in new data into our database and then reflect that in the UI or revalidate the data as well too. So on our index route here, let's say, for example, down below here, we wanted to have a new quizzes form. So I'm going to start by moving this out into a separate component, actually. So we're going to do quiz form.tsx, export default function quiz form. That all looks good. We'll return something here. It's probably going to spit out a bunch of stuff. We actually don't want that right now. Let's do just something simple here, like a form. And wow, okay, yeah, sure. we'll accept some of this stuff because there's some parts here that are decent. We have a title, description, question. So we have 3 labels, inputs for title, description, question, and then we have answers inside of a form. We'll keep that for now. We'll go in here, quiz form, tab to complete there, and it auto-completed quiz form. Okay, so import quiz form. It's styled beautifully right now, if I do say so myself. Let's start breaking this out into making this look a little bit better. Now, the way that Tailwind usually recommends to do things is that you start by duplicating styles until there's you're kind of iterating, and then once there's a more consistent pattern, then you abstract it out into a component. So rather than, for example, I want these inputs to look a bit better. I want them to have background, gray, 100, rounded, padding 2. Rather than saying, okay, I want to do this or move this out to a component, actually what they recommend doing is doing this first and then moving it out to a component. You can kind of do this however you want, The one way of working like this is then if you Command D, you can select multiple and say, actually, I kind of wanted, let's say background gray 50, border gray 100, and maybe padding 1. Actually, border gray 2. Okay. So that's one way to do it. You could also move it out to a component. Definitely up to you. Class name, let's flex this. Let's do a row, flex row. Column. Yes. Okay, that looks fine. Let's do some margin on the top. More margin. Okay, cool. We have a title, description, question, answer, looking okay. It's at least some elements here. Now this is where I actually do want to break this out into a reusable component, and it's going to be for the answer. So let me pull this one out. Let's do function answer, return, do this, and the answer is going to take in some ID. This is going to be some number, sure. For now, for this kind of basic one here, we're just going to hard code this. So we're going to have 3 answers basically, and these are going to be dynamic. So we have answer ID. There's a name, which this name's going to be important in a little bit here. This is how we're able to denote specifically this element in the form. Name of answer / ID. Awesome. We probably also want a checkbox in here to determine which one is the correct answer. So we could do input, type checkbox, name, correct ID. That all looks fine. So we've got our function answer. Now I can go back to here. After here, I want answer 1, 2, 3. Nice. And actually, I could do the old, I could put the styling on the one above it, or I could do an HR here, or a paragraph, the spacer div, right? HR spacer, I don't know. Putting some spacing in between here. Margin Y, 4. Cool. There's many different ways that you could do that. And I actually also might want, maybe inside of here, I want an H3, create quiz, class name, text, Excel, font, semi-bold. So I can do that as well too. So we're starting to cook. We're cooking here, right? We've got a form going. It looks okay. We've got some answers, and then also let's do a button here to actually submit the form. We can actually just crib the button that we created here. Whoops. Sure. So we got this button. That all looks fine. Create quiz. And maybe on our form, we want to do like max width, extra small. Okay, that looks fine. I actually, just staring at this now, I feel like that's too dark. I think I actually want 50 again here as well too. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I probably could have zoomed this in earlier as well too, but okay, so we've got our button on to create our quiz. We've got some fields on our quiz. We've got multiple answers. This is seeming okay. Let's actually now figure out how we take this form and we handle the submission. So to do that, I'm going to go up to the form, and just like the form and the other one, we're going to have an action. And this action is going to call a function. We're going to call it create quiz. And our button, we can just be explicit here that this is a type submit button. This button is going to submit the form to create the quiz. So we have an async function, create quiz, and this takes in form data. And we'll just go like this. Okay, so we have a form. It calls an action. That's going to call this server action to create a quiz. So we have use server. It passes in the entirety of the form data. So inside of here, it's going to know that we have all these elements inside of our HTML form that have names, and we can reference items by names to get the values. Now, we can make this more dynamic. We could have a variable number of answers. There's lots of things that we could do here, but let's just roll with this for now. So the general idea here is that you can basically do, const or let, whichever you prefer. Let's say title, and do form data.get and get back the value of the title. So title, description, question, and then I'm actually going to just do some good old-fashioned copy pasta here to save us a minute, and then I'll walk through what we're looking at here. You're like, whoa, he just copy-pasted the whole tutorial. We have 3 answers, so 3 different IDs, 1, 2, 3, and I map over these. And given the ID, I'm going to make an array or an object here of things, an array of objects. One is it's getting the values of form data.answer/ID, so this, and then if it's correct, so if we've checked it to be correct, form data.get check/ID, which this can be check, and if that equals on, which is the value from the form, it's either on or off from the input checkbox, we can do that. Then the reason why I wanted to copy paste this is just to get this SQL query down perfect. This is ChatGPT assisted of the SQL query to get it exactly perfect. No shame in my LLM game. So we're doing 2 things here. We're inserting a new quiz into our quizzes table with the title, description, the text when we create it. So we use the tag template literal here to include the values from our form, the title, description, question, and then we hit the current timestamp. We return the quiz ID. Then we go to the answers table. We put the quiz ID, the answer text, and whether it's correct. So then, again, this is hard-coded. You could do it dynamically, but I have 3 answers. So we do whatever the answer text was, and then whether it was correct or not. So true or false. Now, this is complaining because we don't have SQL right now. Again, we could abstract this out. I'm just going to keep going the lazy route for now and copy paste over Postgres, SQL. That all looks good to me. And okay. So the issue was with form data and it not knowing that, there's no type on here. What is title exactly? What is description? What is question? So added some typings here for as strings so that this SQL function here knows that these values are strings. This is a good time to interject and say that the reason I'm using this SQL tag template literal Postgres package is just because it's easy. In your production system or in something more serious, you might use something that gives you some of these benefits by default, whether it's an ORM, and ORMs can give you type safety around how you query data back from your database. You define your schema. It can help you run database migrations as well too. Super recommend that for more complex things. But at least for the simple example here, this works pretty well. We can also add some validation onto our server actions to actually expect and check the form of our form data, to look at the values that we get back and make sure they match the type of data that we expect. For the simple example, it's fine. And just before we actually run the SQL command, what we can do here is do ye ol console log, and I'll just comment this out. I'll hit save, and let's actually say my new quiz test. What is a quiz? And we'll say that the first one is the right answer, create quiz. Okay, so here's the shape of the data that we've got back. Title, my new quiz, description, answers, this all looks right. So the data we've got back looks correctly here. It seems like we should now be able to, rather than just console log it out, actually insert this data into our database. Now, I want to do this the wrong way first. I want you to see what happens. So I'm going to hit create quiz, and you're not going to see anything happen. But that doesn't mean that it didn't actually work. So if I reload the page, I see my new quiz. So it did actually work. It did insert into the database, but remember that other component, this component up here that was selecting all the data from the quizzes? Well, it didn't know that there was a data mutation that happened, that the data changed and it needed to go fetch new data. Now, the cool thing about Next.js and this whole model is that we actually give you the primitives for how to model this relationship, whether it's at the route level, or you could even get more specific at a specific tag of your data. So in this example, we can do something at the route level. So revalidate path, and we're going to say we're going to revalidate the index path here. And if I do control space, I can get this to pop up, say, okay, revalidate path from next cache. And again, if I wanted to get even more granular, I could add tags to specific data fetches and only invalidate those cache tags. But we're going to say, you know what, invalidate this whole path here. Okay, back over here on the right, another new quiz. This is my quiz. What is the meaning of life? Deep question. Well, we have, I don't know, man. We have coding, and we have 42. The answer is 42. So now we're going to create a quiz, and we didn't have to do anything, and the data refresh on the page without putting the browser into a loading state. So in one network round trip, Next.js was able to go to the server, do the data mutation, and actually return back the new UI just for this portion of the page. It's pretty mind-blowing, but the whole thing is kind of integrated together, both for how you fetch your data, how you mutate your data, how the data is cached. It's all part of one system. And if I wanted to, for example, clear out this form on submission, I could also do that as well too. But I can click into another new quiz here. Okay, what is the meaning of life? I don't know, man. Show answer, 42. Okay, so I'm feeling like this is a good time to start to try to wrap things up and actually get our site online and get a URL that we can share out to the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop our dev server. And I mentioned at the start, you can create a Vercel account. Now, Vercel is going to make it really easy to deploy your Next.js application or really any front-end application. So I've already made an account there. I've already connected it with my GitHub account, but I've installed the Vercel CLI. So whatever package manager you want, npm, pm, whichever one you want to use, I've installed the version of Vercel in the CLI. And what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to actually make a new project. So I'm going to link this to a new project. We're going to set up a new project. I'm going to put it on my account. It's not a project. We can call it, sure. Yep, that's all great. The reason why I'm doing this first and keep the default settings here is that I want to add an environment variable. So for example, if I go Vercel env -- help, it's going to tell me a little bit more about what I can do here. So you can, you can remove environment variables, you can add environment variables, you can concatenate them in from files. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's say Vercel env add database underscore URL. That looks right to me. Okay, what's the value of database URL? Well, let's paste this in. And we're going to say this is for production, preview, and development. Hit enter. Awesome. Added that environment variable. Now, if I want to do Vercel -- prod, we should have all the information we need to actually deploy our application to production. So if I click on this URL, it'll open it in my browser on the right here. It's going to authenticate with my Vercel account. It's going to say, hey, your deployment is building. Now, this is a good time to talk about what is actually happening during this build. So the default settings for Next.js is it's going to run next build. And the next build command is what optimizes your application for production. It does the compilation. It does the minification. It does the bundling. All of these things that you can dig into more if you want to go past the introduction level, but they help make your site as fast as possible. And they're parts that have been optimized for you such that you don't have to think about them or necessarily configure all the tools unless you really want to. So now on the right here, we see that our deployment finished. It talked to our database and it fetched back the information about the quizzes. We even see the new quiz that we just added here locally. You could have different databases for local and prod, of course, if you'd want. And we've got our unique URL for this deployment. Now, the cool thing is I can actually go to Vercel. I can add and buy custom domains. So maybe I want to launch my new quiz startup. I can add analytics. I can do a whole bunch of things. But it's really that easy just to get your first site online, whether it's Next.js or any other frameworks, using Vercel and integrating it into the rest of all the changes you'll make in the future as well too. All right, so we've covered a lot here. We've done an introduction into React and Next.js. We've talked about some of the fundamentals of what make up React components and how to build Next.js applications. We've built out a little quiz app, and we've actually got it online as well too. This is just the start of your coding programming journey with Next.js and React. I also want to mention some other resources where you can dig in and learn more. We have lots of content on Vercel, but also the React docs and the React tutorial is very, very good. So please check out react.dev/learn. And then we also have a more in-depth tutorial on the Next.js site as well too, both more on the foundations of how we move from JavaScript to React to Next.js, and also building an even more in-depth application than what I just showed today, kind of a dashboard style app, as a step-by-step course on this dashboard as well too. So both of these resources should be helpful in you continuing your Next.js and React journey. If you liked this type of longer form course or tutorial, please let me know. I would love to do more content like this. If you have questions or you want to see other things created in the future, leave a comment down below. But that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for the next one. Peace.